Hello, everyone. So this talk is some sort of an amalgamate of two works. One is about to appear in Wine. It's called Privacy Game. It's with Yiling Chen and Salil Vadan, all locally made, locally grown. The other one is from EC 2012 with Craig Boutier and his student Tyler Liu from University of Toronto. Yanis Kirganis from University of Petra at the time. I'm not sure he's there now. Simi Haber and Ariel Pukacha from CMU.
And
Ariel is a former member of,
fellow.
Former circus fellow, so it's kind of like grown in Harvard. Okay, so these talks both have in common the fact that I pose some utility model for something that typically doesn't have a utility model or not clear what its utility model is. But in terms of why I combine these two works is that actually it's because I like them. And I like them because, this talk is, as I like to say, it's sponsored by the letter Y. It's a terrific letter that we all know and love. Starts many words that are relevant for boring CS talks. But all in all, the high level of this research, I think, started in a very similar fashion. The high level of what we did is just, we asked this very high level question that has multiple answers. We pick a few of our favorite answers and we just mathematically formalized what's going on there. And then we started working on this mathematical model and proved something. So I'm not saying that I have all the answers, and I'm not saying I have a correct mathematical model. All I'm saying is that I have a mathematical model for which I'm able to say something that I personally find interesting. Now, whether or not the fact that I like this research or like the results should mean anything to you is a big question, is a right question. But I'm here to talk about my work, and this is the work that I kind of like. Now, more specifically, we'll start with talking about this first paper, privacy games, but we'll even start about something simple, a game. Sorry, not games, a game. A very simple game that's so simple that it's ridiculous. In this very simple game, benevolent agent A offers to make the selfish agent B a sandwich. And she just asks this B agent, hey, do you want it to be whole rye or wheat? So what should agent B do? She should send a signal, whether I want the sandwich with rye or with whole wheat. And it's very, very simple to see that if our selfish agent loves rye over whole wheat, she will send the signal rye. If she loves the whole wheat over rye, she will send whole wheat. And that's it. Calling this a game is an exaggeration. Here's where things get tricky because of the word privacy. And we ask, what if our selfish agent B consider this information to be private? Or broadly, why and how do privacy concerns of selfish agents affect their behavior? So this is our high-level question, and to tackle it, we're computer scientists. The first thing we do is to complicate things and introduce notation, right? So here's our notation. Our agent has a type, 0 or 1, whole wheat or rye. She sends a signal T hat, a whole wheat or rye. And she gets our utility from the signal, which is rho of T if she sends the type she actually prefers, 0 if not. This is how we modeled it. And going back to altering the game to consider B's privacy concern. Okay, we want to alter it. How? Why does she consider this to be a private information? How much will that privacy information affect her? How are those privacy concerns affect what's going on here? Think about all the possible things that might cause B to be alarmed about releasing her private information. She might be concerned about an adversary. She might be concerned about future games and agents she will tackle. She might be concerned with future events. If something is more likely, maybe she'll behave in a different way than if something is less likely. She might consider even some randomness in a mechanism that we will offer her to protect privacy, she might be considering of that randomness. There are many, many things that go into B's consideration of how will releasing her private information may or may not affect her. And if there were lawyers here, they would appreciate me using the term may or may not. This is a complicated question. But luckily, or one of the things that people do, very, very smart people, they say, look, these complicated questions, we don't care. Let us offer you a beautiful, magical tool called differential privacy, that if you use that, you no longer need to be concerned with everything else, because we will give you some worst-case guarantees. This is a definition of differential privacy. Is anyone here not seen this definition before? Before 2005? No, has anyone here not seen the definition? Because if yes, I'll go into, oh, okay, great, good. Thank you for volunteering. Okay, so we're considering mechanisms. These are now large mechanisms that take a population of agents, n agents. Each of them has a type, 0 or 1. And they output something in some range. Okay? Now we say that they preserve differential privacy if for any of these pairs of sets of agents that are completely identical except for maybe one person. Only one person has changed. These are neighboring sets of players. Okay? These are these D and D prime. For any such neighboring D and D prime and any statistical test that I'm going to run, see if the outcome of the mechanism belongs to some set, the probability of passing or failing the statistical test is pretty much the same probability over the two data sets up to the small e to the epsilon factor. Questions about differential privacy? Now, the benefit of differential privacy, and this is a claim, but it's proof is 3 lines long, is that if I tell people, hey, go ahead, use this epsilon differentially private mechanism, then they have the following benefit. Any possible utility in the future that they may gain conditioned on participating in this magical epsilon differentially private mechanism is not much smaller than had they not participated. It's only up to this e to the minus epsilon, 1 over 1 plus epsilon effectively. Okay? This is a very, very beautiful guarantee of differentially private mechanisms. Your utility is effectively unharmed.
So that seems to say that why should I participate? If I have this type of guarantee, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, it has two parts to it. One, my participation has little effect. Okay, so I have almost the same benefits for participating and not participating. Two is that, hey, this small multiplicative factor might still be worthwhile for me, so I might still choose not to participate. Okay? So these are exactly the questions that we were going to talk about in this talk.
Sorry, what's the utility here?
Any future utility, any complex function of your utility, your future games, whatever you think that may happen to you in the future, throw that into this one complex function. By participating in our epsilon differentially private, you're not damaging that future utility too much.
So intuitively, I feel like the inequality should be the other way, and I don't understand why participating gives me a higher expectation.
No. E to the minus epsilon. This is slightly less than 1. So I get almost everything that I could have gotten had I not participated. Okay? This is like 0.99. Right? This is like 1.01.
Yeah.
And the same is true if you switch participate and not participate.
Yeah, by the way.
So right, great. Because I think of it in terms of...
Yeah. So the thing that I sort of swept under the rug, that maybe participating harms me and I don't want to participate, and you giving me this magical epsilon differential private mechanism tells me, okay, you participate, you won't be harmed too much. Okay, going back to our game. In our game, we have that n equals 1. There's just one person. So can she use a differentially private mechanism? Can she, what we refer to in our paper as differentially private strategy? The answer is that yes, there does exist one particular strategy that the agent can take that preserves differential privacy. It's called randomized response. It says the following. Send the true signal, signal your own true type, with probability half plus a little something extra. And I set the little something extra parameter precisely to have that the property of differential privacy is preserved. Don't look at the proof, okay? Just conceptually, half plus a little more. Be a little in favor of sending the true signal rather than the opposite signal. This preserves epsilon differential privacy. Going back to our why question, as you asked, why do we assume that this differential privacy is the right tool? Does it actually address the concerns of agents that have specific privacy concerns? That's what we ask. And here is the model we introduce. Going back to our game, we now take just one of the concerns, a future adversary, that looks at this interaction, and then our evil C tells our selfish agent, takes some action that results in a payment that is based on C's action and B's type. What is this payment? To be specified. But you should think of C as an adversary that first views the signal and then takes an action. Well, how does this agent behave? Complicated question. What we look at is the Bayes-Nash equilibrium. So let me make a few comments about this. First of all, the Bayes-Nash equilibrium, the Bayes-Nash equilibrium really requires that we introduce a prior over the type. So we have this prior D1 and D0 for the probability of the type. Now, anybody here is unfamiliar with Bayes-Nash equilibrium? The concept of Nash equilibrium, at least? The concept of Nash equilibrium, are you?
Nash equilibrium is fine.
Nash equilibrium. So Bayesian is just a random version of it. But its essence, it's the same thing. In expectation, I play such that you would choose the current, selfishly choose your current strategy over any other strategy, and you play such that I prefer this current strategy over any other strategy. In expectation. And expectation is over the types and over the randomness in the system. That's what the Bayesian word means. Okay? I can go into more details if you want, but it really is Nash equilibrium. Okay. Second comment that I want to make is that really we make B and C adversaries. This is payment from B to C. This is a zero-sum game. And furthermore, the action that C takes that will cause C to get the most revenue is to say, you are of type T. When the agent is of type T, to blame that you are of type T. That will get C the most revenue in all the payments that we will consider. And lastly, because no one really cares about C, let's just make the game simple. Omit this additional letter C and think of A as the one who's the adversary. First offering this sandwich, and then taking an action based on the signal. And in that case, we would like to think of A as some evil car insurance company that will remain nameless, that, say, offers a coupon either for some eyeglasses store or for some car racing. If you take the eye coupon store, it says, hey, you have bad eyesight, I need to increase your premium. If you go to the car racing, she says, oh, you prefer risky driving, I need to increase your premium. So that's sort of the story behind if you want to look at those A and B together. Questions about my comment thus far?
Can you repeat the story? So A offers the sandwich?
Yeah. A says, look, I'm giving you a free coupon. Just tell me which type you want.
Type of coupon, okay.
Right. And the B agent signals one of the two preferable coupons. And then, after the signal, the T signal, A takes some action that induces a payment from B to A. Other questions? Okay, so the type of payments that we consider in this work. First, when this payment is the result of a proper scoring rule. I'll talk about it in a minute. Second, when these are just 0-1 payments. The action is an accusation. You are of type 0. And then whether this accusation is successful, then B pays A 1. If it's unsuccessful, B pays nothing to A. And the third type of payment is generalizing this payment with an accusation only when the A agent has an opportunity to say, I don't know, go home. And this I don't know implies that there is no payment. The payment is 0. Okay? So these are the 3 chapters that I'm going to discuss now a little bit, the result in each of the payment models. Okay. Okay? Let's start with proper scoring rules, which I'll probably... Okay. So they are a very well-known way to convert beliefs into payments.
I'm sorry, before you go on, I'm missing the goal, actually. What are we hoping to get at the end of this?
We're hoping to get a characterization of people's behavior, people in the sense of selfish utility agents, people's behavior when addressing privacy concerns, and then see whether they are or do not follow a strategy that preserves differential privacy for some epsilon, or whether, okay, let me put it the most bluntly, whether we need to think of something else other than differential privacy. Maybe differential privacy is not suited. Okay.
In this game, if there was no privacy concern, that would be easy to understand what's going on. I mean,
Yes, and furthermore, you can think of no privacy concerns as no payments. If there are no payments, then you know what you will do. I would send a signal that maximizes my utility.
but alternatively, I can think of payments instead of privacy, primarily. So if I have some payments, then the behavior of A and B is clear. I mean, B will change a bit her preference.
If there was no payment, then obviously because she maximizes her own utility, she would send the immediate.
Payment that she would change
She might.
according to the
Yeah.
formula that they show.
Depends on the payment, depends on the form that the payment takes.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
And actually, we do observe very different behaviors based on this payment. Okay? So maybe going back to Jason's question, maybe we are saying that we need to come with a very fine models of privacy concerns, because taking this out of all the privacy concerns, just considering an adversary's behavior, and when we fiddle with the payment rules, we get very, very different behaviors.
Okay, so you're imagining playing this game, and you've already showed us from a previous slide that one way to play this game is to play differentially.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're asking, if we play this game, what will we actually do?
Will B actually take a strategy that looks like differential private strategy? Okay. Game with scoring rule payments. Scoring rule payments, they are defined by a pair, F0 and F1, where the story behind proper scoring rules is the following. There is some event that happens with a certain probability X. If this event turns out to be 0, I get paid F0 of what okay. There is some event that happens to be 0 or 1. It's 1 with probability X. I'm reporting what is my own belief about the outcome of this event. And if the outcome is 0, I get some function F0 of my report. If the outcome is 1, I get a function f1. And what makes it proper is that if the probability of the event is 1, is x, to be 1 is x, then the report that maximizes an expectation, my utility, is to say this happens with probability x. With probability x, I'll see 1. First, let us consider what happens with just this payment without the signal. Let's consider some benchmarking, okay, where B doesn't first send a signal. A just grabs a B person from the street and blames him or says some belief about that person being of type 0 of type 1. Well, the utility of what A reports is that it's D0 with, it'll be 0, this agent, with probability D0, and then you get F0 of what she reports, B1, and then you get F1 of what she reports. So it's very clear, at least, that A should play D1. This is the probability that the agent will be 1, so she plays D1. The B agent just was held down from the street, grabbed down from the street, it just is forced to pay. This B agent, the 0 type, pays F0 of what A reports. The type 1 pays F1 of what A reports. Now this is the benchmark game without the signal. How does the signal change?
I'm confused. You're interpreting the behavior of A as the probability of 1.
A grabs a random B person from a population and then reports her belief that this person is of type 1. That's the game.
Yeah,
that's the benchmark
the
game.
distribution by D0 and D1. I assume D0 plus
Is the
D1
probability. Yeah, D0 is the probability
So
that type 0 and
the fact
D1.
that you said player A reports D1 and not just the distribution.
Reports her belief that this is a person of type 1. That will be the strategy that maximizes her utility.
Yeah, I was just trying to extract why A didn't report, say, D0. But
Oh, just because of the naming of the thing, right? If she would get,
in other words, it looks symmetric to me.
it looks symmetric.
You had an asymmetric solution that was confusing. I figured it out.
Okay.
I understand what you're saying.
Going back to the signal game, with the signal. How does the signal change this grabbing a person from the street? Okay, now our A agent has to decide about two things, X and Y. X will be the probability that this is a person of type 1 once A views the signal 0. Y will be the probability this person is of type 1 once you've used the 1 signal. Okay? And this is her function. It's not really important that you read through the details of what she expected to gain, but it's very simple to see that the best X and the best Y that A could use is really the probability that I'm getting someone of type 1 conditioned on seeing the signal 0 or conditioned on seeing the 1 signal.
Could you say again what X and Y is?
X is her report in case she sees the 0 signal. Y is her report in case she sees the 1 signal. And it's very obvious that they should be the probability of that signal being sent from someone of type 1. Okay, B has slightly more complicated function. We denoted with the probability of a 0 type agent to send the signal 0, the probability of type 1 agent to send the type 1 signal. I'm not going into the specifics, but here's the bottom line. These X and Y's, the probability of seeing, okay, I have a mistake here. So these X and Y, the probability, okay, the probability of someone being of type 1 condition on the signal 0, and the probability, condition on the signal 1, and the probability of someone being of type 1 condition on the type 0. Okay, let's go back to this y. Okay, what was y? It was the probability that someone is of type 1 conditioned on, on seeing the signal 1. That is some half plus epsilon. And it turns out that, this is my mistake, the probability of someone being of type 0 conditioned on seeing the signal 0 is the exact same probability. It will be this half plus something. So A's posterior belief, once she sees the signal, is that that signal was sent from the type, from an agent with the same type, with probability half plus this little epsilon. So it's like randomized response only from A's posterior perspective.
So why should it be biased towards 1 in both cases?
What? No. This is my mistake. This is the probability of 0. I have a typo.
So you're saying 0 equals...
The probability of truthfulness, the probability of the signal actually indicating the type
I see.
from both types, from both signals, is the same. That's my typo, and my apologies for that. Okay? There is some technical condition on what F0 and F1 are, but there's just that you can flip this 0 and the 1 by name. But aside for this condition, it's like the posterior looks like randomized response. Okay, switching to a different model of payments, the 0-1 payments, where, again, as ever.
Sorry, what was the conclusion?
I'm not saying a conclusion, I'm saying this is the posterior. Okay, the posterior belief of A, given the signal, is almost like randomized response. But can we take it offline? Can we take it offline? It's slightly longer and I'll...
I mean, we would just walk through this exercise, hopefully to learn something, and I didn't learn anything. So, like, why do we walk through the exercise?
Can I go through what you have learned later offline? Because I do think you have learned something, which could be different.
You get what the result
Okay.
is?
You get?
Oh, okay.
Oh,
So you at least...
Oh, you don't get
Yeah.
what?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
you can postpone maybe the interpretation.
Okay, let's postpone the interpretation, just stick with the result. Okay? The result is the following. From A's perspective, the signal 0, given the signal 0, she believes this is type 0 with probability half plus some epsilon. And it's the exact same probability when she sees the signal 1 and believes this is of type 1. So the honesty happens with probability half plus some epsilon. And it's the same probability
In the Bayes-Nash equilibrium of this.
in the Bayes-Nash equilibrium of this game.
And your goal was to compare this to differential privacy.
My goal is to compare it to A and for comparing it to B herself playing randomized response. And it's not that B plays randomized response, it's that A views, after B's behavior, A views things as randomized response. And that's why it's quite contradictory to the model or the proposal that B should play randomized response. And I do want to say a few more words, but it'll take me more than 2 minutes. That's why I want to take it offline.
I mean, I guess if I can't understand your first application of your analysis, I'm not going to understand any of your future applications of your analysis either.
Well, considering that these are 3 disjoint chapters, then I really hope you would. Did you understand the result? Or you don't understand the result? Okay. So, okay. Condition on seeing the 0 signal.
I feel like you said that already.
Okay.
I don't understand what that means. And
So you don't
had
understand the interpretation?
You had a, like, how simple. You
Let's
wanna
just think of
know-
it as a problem about this game. You understand the game and the
Yeah.
prior? The game is what's written up there.
Yeah, I understand the game.
Okay, and then there's a prior, D0 and D1 on types of B, right?
Yeah, and
And so it's well defined what a Bayes-Nash equilibrium of this game is?
of course.
Okay, and so now he's characterizing the Bayes-Nash equilibrium of this game. Sure. It's a unique Bayes-Nash equilibrium, and it has the property that A's posterior on B's type, after seeing B's message, is sort of symmetric when it sees a 0 or a 1. So if A sees a 0, it believes that B's type is 0 with some probability half plus epsilon. And when it sees a 1, it believes that B's type is 1 with probability half plus epsilon.
Okay.
Okay, that's
So that
a
seems
theorem.
similar to the differential privacy conclude.
It seems
Right, but there was no differential privacy that fell out of the analysis of this game, right? There's no differential privacy as part of the definition of the game.
Right, so that's
That's
the
what he's
whole,
looking for.
that's the
So
whole
I
result.
would expect that to have been a conclusion that was made, and I didn't ever hear that conclusion being made.
I think you did say that one. So why don't you let's keep going?
okay. Is it okay if we continue?
You get the punchline.
Okay. Okay. Games with 0-1 payments, where again B sends a signal, and the payment now is really A sends an accusation, you're of type 0 or you're of type 1, and the payment is 1 if A makes the right accusation and 0 if she makes the wrong accusation. Now the utility of A is really to get $1 if she managed to guess the right type. And now let's consider again a benchmark game without the type, without the signal. And in this benchmark game, well, without loss of generality, one type is more prevalent than the other, so this is what A would guess. I pick a random person from the street, I know nothing about him, I consider this person to be one of the majority. Now returning the signal, the base Nash equilibrium of this full game, well, let's go to the bottom line. In any setting of the values of the coupon, none of the B agent, or at least one of the B agent, has to act deterministically, sends the same signal all the time, either reports truthfully or lies all the time in any base Nash equilibrium of any setting of these parameters, once we fix them. So now we don't see any randomness at all. If we wanted B to play some randomized response, which has to be randomized, at least one of the B agents doesn't randomize. Now, where do we see something that does resemble randomized response? Well, if instead we think of the valuation of the coupon to be sampled from some continuous distribution. Now, if it's sampled from a continuous distribution, what effectively happens in a base Nash equilibrium of this game is that B's strategy is some threshold strategy. There exists some t, it's the result of A's function, but there exists some t such an agent with coupon valuation greater than this threshold always report truthfully. And an agent whose valuation of the coupon is less than t always lies. Now, why does that appear to be randomized response? Well, if A doesn't know B's valuation, because B's valuation is sampled, so A doesn't know how much B values the coupon, then A could think of B as playing randomized response. A certain fraction of the population will report truthfully, the other fraction would lie. Questions about 0-1 payments?
What is the interpretation of the rho?
Rho is the value of the coupon, or more specifically, the agent's trade-off between what she gets from the coupon and her payment to the agent, to the adversary.
Is that saying is there a way to interpret it in the privacy setting?
There is no privacy again, right? There is no definition of privacy here. There's just definition of payment. The balance between the two components of the payments, of the utility. The third and probably the most complicated game that we analyze is, again, B sends a signal, but then A either make an accusation or A says, I don't know. And when A says, I don't know, you go home and you don't pay anything to A. Now, when A makes an accusation, when this accusation is successful, she guessed 0, you're of type 0, she guessed 1, you're of type 1, you pay some positive parameter. When it's not successful, actually A is the one paying B in that case. Okay, if A is wrong in our accusation, if I blame David of having, I don't know, some medical condition and it's not, then I am forced to pay forced to pay David. Again, going back to the benchmark game, and now it's quite important because we set the parameters without a signal in a way that A has no incentive to make an accusation.
Are the first two rows the same as in the previous game?
In the previous game, this was 1, 1, 0, 0.
Okay.
Okay, and now we're letting these parameters run wild.
If you had made this choice there, does it make sense to make the
It
choice?
doesn't really change anything. We have made it. It doesn't really doesn't really change anything in terms of the analysis.
So it only matters if you can avoid somehow. It only matters if you can do this third option.
Yeah, and I will show why. But it is important to note that if A just picks a random person, then she has no incentive to make an accusation. Her utility is 0. Okay, this is how we set the parameters of the payment. And now what happens when the game has a signal? Well, this is what happens. And there are various conditions and various things, but there is one setting of parameters that really causes B, Bayes-Nash equilibrium strategy, to be completely randomized. Not 0, no 1. And under a certain setting, it'll also be the same. So both of them will report something truthful with probability greater than half. Let me go slightly into the details of this. Okay? Let's think of what is B's strategy space. This is the axis of the 0 type. The 0 person can send the 0 signal with probability P, the type 0 person. The type 1 person sends the type 1 signal with probability Q. So the type 0 person needs to decide on a parameter P. The type 1 person needs to decide on a parameter Q. And these are all the all possible P and Qs that they can decide on, the 0, 1 square. What happens in this square? Well, it turns out that there is this partition into regions where above this line, for the 0 signal, A prefers to make an accusation you're of type 0. Below this line, for a PQ strategy, these probabilities, A prefers to say, I don't know. It turns out that there is an equivalent line for this type 1 signal. Above it, A prefers to seize the type 1 signal, says you're of type 1. Below it, A prefers to say, I don't know. You might even prefer to say you're of the different type, but let's ignore that for now. And now, because of these two lines, again, we need to condition what is the value of the coupon. Now, if the value of the coupon, for instance, is very, very large, way larger than the payments that B might make to A, then they have no incentive to lie. They will report truthfully. But it turns out that the B and E, under certain parameters, could be any one of these 5 points, including the intersection point. And the condition to make this, the B and E strategy of agent B, is the following condition. I'm not going to go into the specifics. But furthermore, we want this point to lie on the P equals Q axis, because that P equals Q implies randomized response. That means that they are both truthful with the same probability. And we need yet another condition to make this on the P equals Q line. So there is a game, because of the payments, where B's Bayesian-Nash equilibrium strategy is to play something that really looks like randomized response.
What do you mean when you say randomized response?
I mean that in the specific case, that P equals Q. Both types say, I'll report truthfully with some probability, and I lie with the opposite probability, with 1 minus that probability. But it's the same probability for both, and it's greater than half. So they're inclining to be truthful. For example, if you want a strategy that really preserves the most privacy, that's half-half, right? Regardless of my type, I will send a signal, you will know nothing about me. So randomized response says it's slightly greater than half, and it's equal for both types of agent. Other questions?
And our interpretation of randomized response is something like a privacy interpretation.
That strategy is known to preserve, that it satisfies the property of epsilon differential privacy. It is known.
These are not the only ways to randomize. Like they could say, I always, like on one, if your type is 1, then I said, send 0 with probability 1/3 and 1 with probability 2/3, and it's 1, then I say with 1/3 plus epsilon and 2/3 balance.
Sure.
So this having the same probability, this symmetric behavior is not essential for.
It's not essential to preserve privacy, but it is effectively what all those previous works that you may be familiar with some offer. Regardless of the type, they will behave the same. I do want to point out to some threshold phenomena that happens here. Suppose I'm only changing this row 0, row 1, the valuation of the coupon. Let's go back to this condition. I can either satisfy this or not satisfy this. The moment I shift, I add some delta or multiply the row 0, row 1 by some factor, the strategy of the B agent jumps from this point to some other point. But as long as it doesn't jump, it stays in the same point. So B's strategy is independent in some way from the valuation of the coupon. And that is not exactly what randomized response in those classical models of the previous works that we looked at, it's not exactly what they predict. In those, there is some trade-off between the value and how much privacy or I'm willing to risk. B and E, the Bayes-Nash equilibrium, means that B locks A in a certain indifferent state. A has no incentive to deviate from her strategy. And A's utility in our model is independent of the value of the coupon. That is why B's strategy is independent of the value of the coupon. OK. And another comment is that A's profit in this game with the signal is still 0. It's still the same the same profit she had in the benchmark game without the signal. And that we find weird. OK, so there are different models. I'm not going to go into the rest of them. But the big question is differential privacy too strong of an assumption? Is it a worst-case assumption that is not effectively what people care about? Big open question, and I think there are a lot of ways to think about it. One particular venue that we are trying to look at is to extend this scenario to other scenario. The classic scenario when a curator, a trusted data curator, needs to report something about the population without them or without inflicting any privacy, without hurting the privacy concerns of the people in the data set.
I'm not sure that, well, differential privacy doesn't look at a specific game. So we give a general answer, what is approximately okay with respect to any game you're playing.
Precisely.
Here you're tuning, you're looking at the optimal behavior with respect to a specific
The
game,
Bayes-Nash
with a specific behavior of impairment rule and behavior of Alice.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that differential privacy is not a useful tool. It's a very useful
I
tool.
didn't expect you, but
OK. All I'm saying that it might be somehow the wrong approach because it's the worst case. It's a worst case guarantee.
The question is whether differential privacy, in a sense, approximates the solutions that you get here, which are optimal for these games in a general way. So it's like an oblivious way of designing your strategy. And then the question is whether it is still quite a good strategy for all these games, regardless, of the different parameters that you have.
And we know it to be good. We know it to risk only an epsilon fraction of the potential gain.
Sorry, so maybe just summarize for myself, but so are you saying that your work shows that somehow the best respect to privacy behavior is not the one that comes from differential privacy? Is this what you're saying?
I'm saying that the,
Games?
first of all, do observe that there are games, there are settings with the agents themselves play a strategy that has differentially private interpretation.
Okay, but that
Yes,
does
no.
not include this particular question.
Okay, what?
This is orthogonal to this question of whether differential privacy is right to no.
I'm not sure it's orthogonal. It's a partial answer. It's the start of an answer, I think. Looking at
Okay,
what...
but it doesn't go in the direction of saying that it's wrong, right? It says that the optimal
No,
behavior rule
there are-
is like.
I think...
So, I mean, is there a concrete game in which differential privacy gives you epsilon and the BNE equilibrium gives you 2 epsilon, or no?
Oh no, so it's actually, you can think of it the other way around. If I can look at a certain model and say, oh, the epsilon I need to tell the agents to pick is so and so, and this work, you can think of it as computing the epsilon from the parameters of the game. That's one way to look at this work. But I much rather look at it in a broad perspective of asking what is people's behavior under concrete privacy concerns, and whether telling them, oh, go use a differentially private mechanism is something that they would really go into. How much time do I have? So I'm supposed to finish at 1, but I know it's not supposed to be 1. It's supposed to be...
Yeah, normally we try to finish the talk part in an hour, and then, but so you can go, if you want to tell us a little bit about the other part.
Okay, then I'll tell the other part and just get up and leave when you're tired.
Oh, probably good to do. I mean,
Yeah. Okay, the other part, utilitarian view of social choice. Well, the good news is, okay, I'm going to talk about social choice and our work, and then analyze it in worst case and average case, and wanted to ask you a question about ongoing work, but I don't suspect I'll have enough time. So I'll probably stop at this, the utilitarian view of the social choice. Anyway, the good news, this talk will end. And what do you want to do after, except for going to see Ellie's talk at 1? Other than that, this afternoon, what would you rather do? Well, it depends on whom you're asking. Because Yi Ling, being a very studious person, she prefers to continue study. And then if you tell her you can't go study, then she'll hike or she'll eat. And then she prefers that to sleeping and to playing some sport. Whereas Yaron, who's very buff and sport-oriented, really wants to play sport. And if not that, go hiking. And if not that, eating and studying and sleeping. And myself, who's a very fat and lazy person, prefers to eat first and then sleep. And then when you tell me not that, I'll take the least strenuous activity, which is studying, and then I'll do the other two. And what is a social? And in case you haven't understood the message, each individual in the population has a preference among these alternatives, a ranking among M alternatives. What does a social choice function do? It takes these N preferences and spews out one alternative, a winner. And that social choice function, David can testify, it's been extensively studied. It's been studied since the day of Condorcet. It relates to Arrow's theorem, relates to many, many beautiful things in game theory that I will not survey. I do want to point out to one specific family of social choice functions. These are scoring social choice functions. They use some scoring vector. And they essentially take each of the alternatives and says, oh, it got to the third place, it gets the third score. And I sum out the scores of all the alternatives. The alternative with the best scores, that's the winner. And in case you don't think this is very prevalent, then think of voting in a booth. You use the vector 1, 0, 0, 0, 0. You just tell the US government which is your preferred party, representative, whatever you're voting for. It's typically studied, though, from the axiomatic approach. Because a lot of those works say, I want some social choice function that satisfies property x or property pi, and then you can have a case where two people debate about one social choice function versus another. One satisfies pi, one does not. Does that mean f1 is better than f2? Does that mean f2 is better than f1?
Sorry, what is sigma in your sum?
What?
What is sigma?
Summing.
No, sigma, the next one.
Oh, the rankings. Okay? So these are elements in SM. Okay? Really a vector of the preference. Now, we are peaceful people. We want to make those people not fight anymore. And again, we ask why. Why are we looking for a social choice function? And the answer that you should give is that, well, that winner is the best alternative. This is what people really want. What does it mean it's the best? What does it mean they really want it? What we assume in our work, that the rankings are derived from some latent or hidden or implicit utility. Going back to Yiling's example, let's assume she really wants to study. That's the benefit she gets from studying. And if not, that's the benefit she will get from hiking. That's the benefit from eating, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas myself, I like eating and sleeping pretty much equally. And then I'll take studying and the rest. And if you don't want zeros, you don't want equalities, just perturb them a little. So they'll be sharp inequalities. In essence, we get to view those sigmas, those preferences, but behind them there are utilities. My utility for alternative A is bigger than alternative A prime, then I rank A before I rank A prime. This is in first or second or third position. This would be in fifth, second, or eighth position. And so given a sequence of preferences, we can ask ourselves, what are all the utilities that are consistent with the rankings that we see, in which my utility for A is greater than utility to A prime because A comes before A prime in my ranking. Okay? Okay. And now, based on utilities, now it's very simple to say what is the best alternative. It's the alternative that maximizes the social welfare. This is what everybody wants, or wants the most. I just sum up all the agents, sum up the utility from each alternative. The alternative that best gives utility to all people, that's the one that I'm after. The problem is that I don't get to view you. I only get to view the rankings. Now, really, had I been given access to the explicit utilities, the problem would be trivial. I can solve it in linear time. The complication comes from not knowing what is you, knowing only the ranking. And in that case, in the worst case, what I want to do is to maximize the following ratio. Looking at all utility profiles that are consistent with the set of rankings of the population, I want to look at the maximum, the best social choice, the utility of the best social choice, versus the social choice, the social welfare, the social welfare, the utility, the alternative that maximizes social welfare, versus the social welfare of the alternative that our function picks. And we want our function to minimize this ratio. And on the average, then on of f. Because this is worst case. Now, the expectation in the average case is also over u. Okay, now I'm considering some model for utilities. Out of all utilities that are consistent with the rankings given, I'm looking to minimize this ratio.
And you have some prior over the...
Here, in the average case, I've given known prior. In the worst case, no. It is worst case assumption.
So the average case is I guess if we, if we're considering settings where a social choice function is going to act, then the average case.
It's probably more realistic. But if we think like computer scientists, then the first one is.
When you're averaging over all possible, but you're averaging over all possible alternatives, not all possible utilities. That's why they're not there. Right?
I'm averaging over all utility preferences that are
utility,
consistent.
Sorry, I thought that was an A. Okay, sorry.
Okay, sorry.
It's me not wearing my glasses. Sorry. Okay.
Okay, it's utility preferences that are consistent with the rank.
Yeah.
Question? Now, here is one claim that I want to make. Might be controversial, might not be. I want to make that from very high level, this looks like clustering for machine learning. Because if you think about it, what does clustering from machine learning perspective does? Well, you're giving me some, I don't know, n web pages, and you want me to cluster them. These web pages are about soccer, these web pages are about computer science, these web pages are about tables. And had you given me the actual labels with what is the topic of each web page, my work would have been trivial. Same thing here. I want to find the maximal social welfare, but I don't get to view the utilities. Had I been given the utilities, my work had been trivial. But in clustering, you give me, instead of labels, you give me some matrix, some notion of similarity of distances between the web pages. And here you're giving me rankings or preferences between the alternatives.
Sorry, just so was it trivial means that you would solve a linear system?
Yeah. Here or here?
On the right.
On the right, I'll just
Yes,
do a computation. Just sum the utility for each alternative. Right? Soccer. How much do you want soccer? How much Jason wants soccer? How much Jesper wants soccer? Et cetera, et cetera. That's a number. How much do you want? I don't know. Hiking.
If you want to get only one.
The winner.
If you want, okay.
The winner. We only want to find the winner.
If you want the ranking, that's.
Even that will be simple. If I know the utilities, even that will be simple.
Just go one by one. Okay.
Yeah. Now, in clustering, because you don't give the labels, that is what you're really after. You're giving some proxy to the labels, some notion of similarities or distances between web pages. You have to choose some partition objective that uses the metric and try to minimize or optimize that partition objective. And here in the social choice world, because we don't get to view the utilities, we pick some social choice function that we believe will output the best alternative among the M alternatives. Now, the story slightly deviates in the following line. A work of Balkan, Blum, and Gupta in 2009 really leverages on phi. It says, oh, you pick this objective, you know what you're doing, right? If you were looking at this web pages, you got this matrix, you're optimizing k-means or k-median, then let's look at instances where really getting an approximation to k-means implies getting a good approximation of the target labeling. Our work takes a somewhat orthogonal approach and says, you chose some function because it satisfies a certain property. No. Here, use this other function. Use this function g that we guarantee you to be a good function in the sense that it really tries to maximize the social welfare. So this is where the story sort of deviates. But up to the last bullet, and conceptually, the notion that I don't give my desired input, but rather a proxy to my desired input, I hope this comes across. Because this is how we started looking at this problem.
I'm sorry. As a social planner, assuming I was utilitarian, the social choice function I would like to implement, is this defined with utilities or defined on rankings, then the social choice function?
From our standpoint, if you ask me if I'm the social organizer, then I would pick it from the social welfare. But up to, or at least the bulk of literature on social choice function doesn't look at utilities. Just look at a certain function, a social choice function, that satisfies axiomatic axioms that they believe should be the right axioms. And so the two approaches are complementary.
You're just trying to find a social choice function that approximates social welfare, right?
Exactly. Instead of something that satisfies certain axioms. Precisely.
Good. Sorry, I thought there was something active in the last two bullets, and there isn't. You just want to find a social choice function as well.
In general, I tend to put on very simple things on the slide. And those that are not simple, I say don't look at them. Okay, so the worst case, let's talk about that. We're given those rankings. We want to minimize the following ratio between the alternatives that maximizes the social welfare under the worst alternative, under the worst utility model. And we're going to make the assumption that all agents are equal and that they all have essentially the same utility. We think of it like they all come with a bag of 100 coins, and they can put the coins on the alternatives based on which one they like the most, on how much they like them. And by the way, I do want to make one thing obvious. I'm not looking at the question of truthfulness here. I'm thinking of the agents now as very, very simple. They're not trying to deceive. They are giving me their true rankings. How much time do I have? Because okay, I'll probably try to.
Line or something.
Okay. You know what? Instead of punchline, let me just do the following. Talk about this. Why doesn't it show? Sorry about that. Okay. Trying to look more than what we've done on that EC that I didn't tell you really, we're thinking of trying to implement this in a Gale-Shapley setting, where you have purples and orange, and each purple agent has a preference among all the orange agents, and each of the orange agents has a preference among all the purple agents, given by this. And there's a beautiful algorithm by Gale-Shapley that matches the purples and the oranges such that the matching is stable. Meaning, no purple and orange can come together and say, I prefer you over the orange I was matched. You prefer me over the purple you were matched. Let's be matched ourselves. That's the Gale-Shapley setting. I'll tell you about later. The problem with this, okay, so what if those rankings also come from a utility model? What if we're trying to maximize the following notion of social welfare of all the purples utility for the orange they were matched to, and all the oranges utility to the purple they were matched to? And the problem is that we mainly have negative results in the worst case. This ratio between any matching to stable matching could be arbitrarily high. And furthermore, the Gale-Shapley algorithm gives me approximation of half with respect to the social welfare, with respect to the subjective just a sec, but I can't do anything better than half.
So are you trying to find a stable matching that maximizes that? Or you
So first of all, we're asking, wait, if we give up the idea of stable, or if we try to look at any matching, can we do better? We can do way better.
Okay, I see.
Okay? And the second question, if we're looking for a stable matching, can we get an algorithm that gives me a rigid guarantee about the social welfare? The answer is that yes, we have Gale-Shapley, and we have examples showing that it's essentially tight. And we're essentially kind of stuck with this, and we're looking for directions to pursue from this point. Or any other ideas for situations where people look at rankings, but they would really, really rather look at utilities instead of rankings. I will stop here.
just had a question on the middle section. Have you got results that relate the probabilistic approach to social choice with the welfare approach? Obviously, there's quite a lot of work that asks which alternative is most likely to be the best, or which rank is most likely to be the best, either maximum likelihood estimators or MAPs, which seems like it should relate to utility, but
Yeah. This was Craig's approach, but it turns out that the average case, I'm not sure if you're asking about the average case or something else. Like the average case, I know a prior about, or I don't know the prior. There exists prior which I don't know. Average case, I know the prior. It turns out that the social function is very, very straightforward. It's just I need to, in general, there are m factorial coefficients that I need to learn from the distribution. And if you assume something else about the prior, there's just m of them.
But and
it's a scoring function. You essentially need to use a scoring function.
Are you working in a particular random utility model?
So under the most general one, really you don't work with anything. But then you need to learn m factorial coefficients of any ranking, how much I will associate to each alternative. But if you assume uniformness, some notion of uniformness or label invariance, then you only need to learn m parameters. Then it only matters the ranking. In essence, you need to learn weights for a scoring function. You need to know ranks for a scoring function. And furthermore, if the utilities are uniform between 0 and 1, then the scoring function you need to use is Boda.
I had a question about the first part. So it seemed like in all three regimes, you were making some assumption that implied symmetry in the probabilities. Either with at the last one there was a ratio that had to be the same. It seemed to imply that the probability that the A thought you were of type 1, given that you said 1, was constrained in a sense to be equal to.
I'm not sure I follow where you saw that.
Like for the scoring rules,
only
there's some label invariance.
Oh, with the scoring rule function?
Yeah, in each one it seemed like there was some constraint.
There's label invariance in the sense that if you take one random variable and you call one outcome 1 and the other outcome 0, and then you take the other random variable, which happens with the same probability, only you flip the labels, then predicting x for the first and predicting 1 minus x for the other gives you the same revenue. That's label invariance.
Right.
It's just the name.
So that doesn't imply.
That doesn't imply. That doesn't imply that.
Okay. I don't see why, but.
Okay.
On the connection between clustering and utilitarian social choice.
Okay, the philosophical connection.
Right. So I was going to ask whether there turned out to be any technical connection, whether you drew any ideas from.
No. The works that look at this type of notion, that my metric is just a proxy for labeling, doesn't look at. You need to pick a different objective.
On that note, is it so there are some works on when you're taking preferences and then you're embedding them in symmetric space, and then you're using that essentially to do something, I guess not like social choice, but is that the connection?
We had a separate work, for example, on the Mallows model, where you do use some embedding into Rn, and you can get some results under certain stability conditions very, very, very immediately. So, same people working on similar kind of problem, they think of similar things, but not really like a conceptual
That's
bridge.
not the technique that you're using.
No, it's not. Okay, thank you very, very much.